Guys, you gotta be careful. I've just been called into town, Uppsala, Sweden, to be precise, and I've just been called here because I've been told there's a group of young researchers who have escaped their natural habitat and are loose in the wild. These PhD students and postdocs and early career researchers are wandering around Uppsala, and nobody is quite sure why. So I've been sent to uncover the mystery. It might be dangerous. This might be my last ever podcast, but I'm going to try and find out what's going on. I see a group of them over there. I'm going to approach them, and I'm going to ask them about their research. Maybe a nice, easy question that hopefully won't land me in too much trouble. Is I'm going to ask them who, if anyone, should know about their research, who should be reading it, listening to it, consuming it in other formats. So, who are those who should know about the research? Let's listen and find out what they say.
But I actually thought about what kind of output that I want to create during our workshop, and actually I want my result to be known to actually the farmers I'm working on now.
My research is important for everyone involved in schools, so teachers, students, school administrators, parents, but also the large organizations that govern what happens in schools, like curriculum developers and boards of education or departments of education.
People involved in implementation of digital health solutions at a policy level or at a decision-making level. That could be governments, that could also be researchers themselves. And then the other group is the people impacted by this, especially patients and clinicians.
I mean, for my research, of course, first of all, it's about like academic audience, let's say scholars working in similar field or like on the same region.
I think I guess for my next research, I'm mainly thinking about policymakers. Obviously, you always want academics to read your stuff, but you also want people that have some power.
NGOs are especially, of course, these days are very interested in this kind of topics, and national, international organizations or whatever it is.
All right, I think policymakers, stakeholders, and then value chain actors, they should know about my research.
So maybe that gives us some insight into who their research is for. But how are they going to communicate it? How are they going to reach the people that they want to reach?
Through every channel that's possible, whether it's academic journals, scholarly podcast, videos, letter exchanges, policy briefs, the whole gamut.
With the government, we are looking at, when we are done with the research, we would want to do a policy brief and share it with appropriate or necessary stakeholders in the government, maybe through the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries. And with the farmers, we are planning on holding focus group discussions where we'll talk with the district veterinary officers, and then they can call the representatives of the villages, and then these people can disseminate the information.
I'm trying to transform my research into more digestible forms. Giving input, for example, to journalists to write journal articles, or people who work at the radio. So I've been, for example, giving interviews to journalists on the radio, also in journals. But Sometimes also academic journal articles work. So, for example, a few years ago, the European Commission contacted me because they had read one of my academic articles. And it was a moment when they were trying to file a case against the Hungarian political regime of Viktor Orban, and they were trying to get some data.
We have an amazing website, and then we might create sort of like a story mapping around a lake where we touch down at various spots and ask people who's your, what species do you care about and in what ways, and what do we need to know about this animal or plant or insect for us to understand its needs and what kind of rights it needs.
This is why I came to this training, to get more information about communicating my research. So I'm thinking this research is funded by Consumers in Lebanon Association. So I think through the Consumers Lebanon Association we have social media platforms that we will use to communicate. We are preparing some technical materials and non-technical materials to consumers on how to choose their product at shelves. And the result will be shared through consumers to politicians and decision making.
And finally, I think it's probably good for all of us to find out, why should anyone care about their research? What's so important about it? Why should anybody care?
That's also a deeper great question that I ask myself all the time. Because I touch upon genocides, broadly speaking, and I think everyone who's a decent human being should care about what happened before, now, and what is happening now to make a better future together.
In reality, we should all care about creating safer spaces for women to exist, but more importantly, we should all care about creating safe spaces for democracy to thrive. And women constitute half the population in most of the world, and so it's important that they care, or we care, about making the world safer for women to participate in politics.
I think we take digital health or digitalization in general for granted, and I think that's because technology is going quicker and we just trying to keep up with it, and often we forget the potential problems that can come from this thing that seems to be there and easily happening.
But I think first I wanted to give this result to them because when I go to meet farmers and we do this survey and focus group, at the end they ask us like, well, how this, what you're doing now, we answered all of your questions, and how all the activities benefit us.
Food, at the end of the day, food. We all live on food, and how can we make our food system sustainable and transform it for better and work for everybody. So we are working with women and youth, and we want to make the food systems inclusive.
And who, you may ask, and you may rightly ask, dear listener, are all of the researchers who you've just been listening to? Let's find out.
I'm Kelly Kalai Chan. I am affiliated with Gothenburg University. I'm a postdoctoral researcher.
So my name is John Black Kabuche. I am a medical doctor. I am also a researcher in digital health or in health informatics.
My name is Gabrielle Edwards. My pronouns are she, her. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden in the Department of Food and Nutrition and Sports Science.
All right, my name is Iman Odonko. I'm a project manager for Healthy Diets for Africa, which is based in Justus Liebig University, Gießen in Germany.
Okay, so my name is Lydia Leitch. I'm doing my PhD at the Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence, Italy.
So I'm Matthew Kessler. I am a science communicator at Table, a platform that explores what is a good future for food.
Noemi Gonda. I'm a researcher at the Department of Urban and Rural Development at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences.
All right, my name is Marie Widengård, and I'm at Global Studies doing environmental social science.
My name is Guðrún Sif Friðriksdóttir. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Nordic Africa Institute in Uppsala, and I have an affiliation with the International Institute at the University of Iceland.
So I'm Ayushi Malhotra. I work with International Rice Research Institute's Gender Platform, CGIAR. I'm based out of India.
My name is Masusa. I'm finalizing my PhD from Wageningen University and Research.
So my name is Nathalie Pano. I work with the Lebanese University, co-directed with the Swedish University of Agriculture, SLU, and with the finance with the funding from Consumers Lebanon Association.
Okay, my name is Han Lee, and I'm from SLU, Department of Forest Economics.
My name is Dr. Shingirai Mutero. I work for the Nordic Africa Institute, and I am a postdoctoral researcher there.
Okay, so my name is Bethach Dambo. I'm a PhD student affiliated with the University of Zambia, that is in Zambia, but it's in collaboration with SLU and SVM.
As you might have guessed, I was not in fact an explorer wandering around Uppsala finding researchers. I was at the workshop itself, and I was at the workshop itself because I was one of the workshop facilitators. Specifically, I was brought there to think with people to help them make scholarly podcasts or academic podcasts. And it's something that I've done for quite a few years, and I really, really enjoy doing it. And this was a wonderful group of people to work with. And a lot of people ask me, like, why do a podcast? Like, why is a scholar bother making a podcast? There's a million different things we're expected to do, those of us who are scholars, not only writing, but also teaching and also administration. So why have a podcast as well? And some people, I think, have a podcast for the wrong reasons, if I can say that. And that's like, another line on the CV, or because it's cool, or because it's trendy, or because it will help their career. And I'm really not interested in working with people if that's their reason for making podcasts. I am interested in working with people who really take the affordances of the medium seriously in thinking about what it can do for their discipline and academia or knowledge production more broadly. And one of the things I think is really interesting is how intimate it is as a discipline. Intimate in a few different ways. Firstly, because, and a lot of people have actually talked about this, I'm not the first person to say this, intimate because the way it's listened to with earbuds in the ear. Intimate because it seems to be quite a reflexive medium in which people can be very open and honest. And intimate also because people can hear the human voice, not just in the written form, but in the spoken form as well, which adds a certain level of intimacy, which is maybe something quite different from what we're used to getting when it comes to scientific communication. The primary way of doing that has, of course, been writing articles, books, chapters, and so on. And this links very much to another aspect which I think is super interesting, which is that it makes knowledge and the knowledge producers a bit more vulnerable. And I think that's a great thing. I think often it's the case that nowadays, because there's a distrust of experts, there's a feeling amongst some people to say, okay, let's pull up the drawbridge. Let's not engage with those people who are questioning expert knowledge and expert knowledge producers. But I think that's really, really bad. I think actually what we need to do is we need to open up the ways in which we produce knowledge to those people who are doubters. And that includes being vulnerable about the way it's produced, showing them misturns that we had, talking through the worries that we had. And podcasting, because it's often, not always, but very often, this discursive medium in which people talk around a subject as well as to a subject, then it really can open up possibilities to show people what actually goes on in a researcher's mind and in conversations between researchers when they're producing their scholarship. I think for a lot of people as well who make podcasts, they find it a very freeing or even a disruptive or even an insurgent way of being a scholar. And I think that's really, really interesting because a lot of people feel a little bit of dissatisfaction with contemporary academia. It's not as exciting as it should be, because, you know, we're dealing with very big questions very often, important questions very often, and yet it becomes something that can become sometimes abstracted, sometimes just turned into this sort of very metricized way of thinking about knowledge. You know, it doesn't really matter so much what it is we're saying, but instead where we're saying it, in which journal, and how highly ranked that is. And I think this is terrible, because actually we're dealing, especially those of us who are social sciences or in the humanities, we're dealing with people. In fact, everyone's dealing with people, not just people in the social sciences. You know, very often we're dealing with people, and we owe it to the people we work amongst or for whom we work to treat the knowledge and the data that we gain from interacting with them as something more than just a line on a CV. I think is really, really important. So I think this disruptive nature, this insurgency that podcasting can engender is really, really key for making a better academia. So I think that's really super as well. And one of the ways in which it does that is, I think, it opens up scholarship to broader audiences. And this is not just because it's free. Of course, lots of things are now free. There's open access journals and so on, but also because the way in which we communicate knowledge is different in a podcast form than what it is in a written article or a chapter or whatever. Partly because it's more conversational, sometimes also because we write in such obscure and obtuse ways which you cannot really say, right? You can't really say these sentences. I know some people do when they read out papers at conferences, but it sounds very awkward to say it because people are saying sentences that people can't even get to the end of without making themselves confused and going around in circles and taking massive deep breaths halfway through the sentence because their sentence is so long and confusing. And I think also we find it much more difficult to use jargon when we're discussing something, especially if we're discussing something with somebody who's not necessarily an expert in the same field as ourselves. And this can make it much more interesting, I think, when it comes to letting people who aren't necessarily in our field or aren't necessarily researchers themselves find out about what's going on. So I think it's open in that way as well. And it really helps both in cultivating a listenership outside of the usual people who might engage with our research, but it also helps create communities of researchers as well. Because, you know, with the best will in the world, I'm not going to be able to read every single thing that comes out in my field, and most people can't either. And we may only meet those people at conferences. And maybe if we're in a smaller institution or we're not in one of the centers of knowledge production, which are primarily, you know, the US, the UK, and the obvious places within those countries, then it can also be more difficult to find communities of scholars working on similar topics or themes or questions. And that's what's really great about podcasting, is that you can create these communities through the act of creating a scholarly podcast. And the final thing, is that it can be very upskilling. There's a certain craft to podcasting, which is what we hopefully worked through when we were doing the workshop in Uppsala. And this means that scholars need to take things a little bit more seriously when it comes to doing the medium. Of course, making a podcast makes you a better writer, makes you a better speaker, and there's a technical aspect as well, although I always try to downplay the technical aspect. You know, those super highly produced podcasts often have a massive team of people working on them. If you're a scholar making a podcast, sure, you need a microphone and you need headphones and you need something to record it into, but you don't need to worry too much. A lot of people come and say, oh, what mic should I buy? I'm like, whoa, first of all, think about what it is you want to do, who you want to communicate with, what sort of format you want to work with, what's the idea that you have. Once you have all those things, then you can think about a microphone. So we spoke a lot in the workshop about how to speak, about how to write. We also learned how to edit using the free open audio editing software Audacity, which lots of professionals hate, but I think is perfectly fine. And then after basically spending a good half a day learning about a lot of different things, then we spent the second half of the day where people made podcasts, sort of, you know, not real podcasts, but rather they made trailers for podcasts, which they may one day make. And I think it was really important for everyone to do that, because everyone could realize, actually, you know what, I can put into action everything that I've learned and I can produce something. And again, like when you start working with a new medium, it's a bit slow and it's a bit finicky. You know, that's how it is. But it's the same, like, you know, if you opened up a word processor for the very first time in your life and start to try and write something, you'd never written anything before, but you knew how to read and write in general, then you would also struggle. And it's totally fine. You get into the flow and that upskilling that comes from that, and especially thinking about what the medium can allow you to do and what it can't allow you to do, because podcasting isn't perfect in every single way. Certainly there are many, many instances when I would advise people not to podcast. Maybe a visual medium might be better to communicate what it is they want to communicate at that time. But I think if people are serious about making a podcast and thinking through the ways in which it can really work to people's benefit is totally worthwhile. And I was really lucky as a teacher, workshop facilitator, whatever I was, in that there was a really, really good group and people really threw themselves into it with lots of enthusiasm, and also were really engaged in the craft, and also, I guess, the political potential of podcasting as well, in terms of what it means in opening up the research to people who should probably know about the research, but often don't. So yeah, thank you for listening to my 10-minute rant about why podcasting is so great for scholars and for students. I hope you enjoyed the rather silly opening as well. Those are all really wonderful researchers, and I'm sure they're going to be producing exciting research in podcast and other forms well into the future. Thank you so much for listening to this short workshop report. The workshop in question was the Young Researchers Workshop, Communicate Your Science, Where, Why and to Whom. It was organised by the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, SLU, and the Swedish International Agricultural Network Initiative, SIANI. I've been Ian Cook, and I have a million thanks to give to Alin Kadfak and Therese Engvall. Goodbye.